Good morning and welcome to Automotive EV. My name is Peter Wooding and thank you for joining us. This morning's session, we're delving into the finished vehicle distribution aspect of the industry, and I'm delighted to welcome three speakers, Awais, Ajmal from Kia Motors, and Dan Parnell from Jaguar Land Rover, and last but no means least, Ed Jones from Degould. They will have each a short overview of who they are and what they do within this sector, and then we will all join together for a panel discussion on what challenges and what opportunities the finished vehicle logistics sector is facing. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Awais.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Awais Ajmal. I'm the General Manager of Supply Chain for Kia Motors UK Limited. I've been here for, or certainly at Kia for the past 16 years, and I've got overall responsibility for the UK supply chain, effectively from factory to the UK. Responsible for storing the vehicles, prepping the new and used vehicles, transportation and dealer support. Prior to working at Kia, I was working at Awais PHH, which is a fleet leasing company, and before that, a management consultant for a number of years.
Okay.
Thank you. If Dan could take over.
Morning, Dan Parnell. So I'm Global Distribution Quality Manager for Jaguar Land Rover. What that encompasses basically is I have responsibility for our vehicles from handover from manufacturing all the way through to dealer and market. And in essence, my role is to ensure that factory quality standards are maintained through the distribution process. I've been with JLR probably 8 years now, second time round, and previous experience with Lotus and BMW, very much sort of like an MP&L perspective. So a bit of background there.
Thank you, Dan. So yours now, Ed.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me on today. So I'm Ed Jones, CEO of Degould. Our focus, for those who haven't come across before, automated imaging and inspections using AI. And probably actually going back sort of a few years, we've probably got Dan, who spoke just now, kind of to blame for a lot of this. We originally set out in the rental car sector, solving the issue of customer disputes. Was a car damaged or not at the time when you return it? And the JLR guys picked this up in about 2014. And showed us that actually there's a good use and application for this in that kind of warranty to logistics handover point. So at the time, it was very much about capturing exterior damage and exterior kind of quality control to kind of replace the manual inspections or to sit alongside the manual inspections that are there. That's then led to working with lots of OEMs over the last sort of 6 or 7 years for us, and as well as ports and different players in the supply chain, both heavily in the UK, where we're based, but also Europe, US, China, etc. And we scanned over 3 million vehicles in that time. What's quite interesting, I guess, the relevance for today is we've always listened to the customers, and the focus at the time was very much exterior damage. We take, on average, 17 images of the wheels, the sides, the fronts, the rears, the roofs, etc., up to 240 megapixels per image. So really high definition, so we can look at kind of paint defect and fine surface scratches and all the elements of damage, but more so, and again, it's almost led by the JLR guys who've been great support of ours, starting to look at the underbody in the last couple of years as that's become a more a focus for OEMs and supply chain, and particularly if there's damage on the batteries, cooling packs, etc., how that plays a role. It's obviously a high cost area, and how we can help to sort of identify that and resolve it. So yeah, thanks for having me today. Hopefully that gives a little bit of context, and I'll sort of chip in with anything useful as we go along.
Thank you. Firstly, sort of, and this is really a generalization, really, I suppose, for us and Dan. How has COVID affected how you look at operating the finished vehicle sector? Do you want to start, Dan? Because you're both sort of out and in. And,
yeah.
That's more receiving here, aren't you?
I think one of the biggest challenges we found is actually how much of a network it is. And what you've seen from our perspective on a global basis, we've seen some markets go into lockdown at different times to others. And it's the interlinked nature of that logistics process actually into market. So that's created shipping delays, it's created local lockdowns, land-based movement has stopped, and you've just had that knock-on effect. So the biggest challenge, I think, has just been that network complexity. Align that as well to the challenges we have from a plant perspective, in terms of the fact that we are now changed a lot of our schedules around. A lot of it is built to order, specifically. So I just think it's been a bit of an eye-opener, actually, how complex finished vehicle distribution is and how interlinked it is. And also, and surprisingly so, actually, how much integration there is between OEMs. Because in effect, logistics is a circular flow. And we're all piggybacking off each other's movements. So that's been the key change and the key element, I think, Peter.
And from your perspective?
Yeah, but pretty much echoing what Andy has said, and that is something which is what became very, very apparent, certainly from a pure finished vehicle logistics perspective. You know, just straight after the lockdown was announced in March, you know, this affected European suppliers, domestic shippers, PDI agents, transportation dealers, and customers. But surprisingly, not so much our factories, which was quite interesting. Yes, they did have a small shutdown over in Korea and in Slovakia, but nothing like what other manufacturers or OEMs had, which presented its own challenges because they were still producing product at a rate of knots, and effectively our entire supply chain had come to a stop, which included cars over on the continent basically being tipped pretty much where they last were in a sort of safe haven. I think as Andy was saying, you do realize that this is a flow and we are all dependent on our competitors moving product for efficient flows around Europe, around the UK, etc., etc. One of the things, and I think the key learnings certainly from that original lockdown were the whole principles about clear communication, trust, and honesty. Being able to give our suppliers, where we are now and giving them regular updates. Having the trust in for them to have the trust in us and for us to trust them to actually carry out what they've said they're going to be doing, and honestly on both sides. And if there is difficult situations, and there were quite a few difficult situations on both sides, predominantly being around cash flow, because nothing was being sold, nothing was being moved, therefore no cash was coming into us or our suppliers. But I think for us it was all about ensuring that we could start moving elements of the supply chain, starting with arriving the vessels which were on the water, and we had quite a few of them coming over from Korea, and having somewhere for them to dock. And when our partner, because of social distancing regulations, were working on a plan but couldn't dock a deep sea vessel, it causes huge problems. And then it's time to actually go around the industry and ask whether or not someone can help us out. And I think it was quite refreshing to see how many people were putting their hands up and saying, look, we're happy to help, which is really good. And one of the things which certainly we learned is that actually, the suppliers, certainly in the UK, they're a good bunch of guys, and happy to help out wherever they can. And I don't think we would have, got through it as efficiently as we did if it wasn't for the support of everyone in the industry. But the second challenge, I suppose, was once we got the product in, was to actually get the network working again. There was the whole thing about distance selling and being able to sell cars in a COVID secure way. So our senior management team worked with our network to actually make that happen. And whilst we didn't wholesale many cars in April, certainly in May we wholesaled more. June we had a pretty good June, a record July, and a record August. So but that was in the backdrop of immense stock pressure. Our stock went from circa 10,000 units all the way up to about 21,000 new units in our compound. So there was this pressure to actually get the units out. But I think there are some learnings, real key learnings for us and the industry from this year. We, as an industry, we are exceptionally dynamic. I know in these forums we do talk about, collaboration and all that kind of stuff. But I think, if it's one thing certainly that I've seen throughout this period is just that collaboration, not only with our suppliers, but with other suppliers that we wouldn't normally use, and how quick they were to actually help out, which I think is a testament to our industry in the UK.
Thank you. Ben's joined us. Morning, Ben.
Morning. Yeah, I had a few issues and continue to have so.
That's life. It's technology.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. It's a pleasure for you to be here. Could you just give a short overview of who you are, and then we will sort of continue with the sort of discussion, and also if you could add from your perspective what you feel the overall finished vehicle market is actually, and how it's standing at the moment.
Okay, yeah. Well, Ben Waller. I'm Associate Director at ICDP, International Car Distribution Program, automotive research, a consultancy business, also a freelance consultant working on other areas as well. I've been involved in finished vehicle logistics and the new vehicle supply chain since '99. Seen obviously a lot of change over that time, and never so much as in the last 6 months. I think that's fair to say. I think everybody would agree with that. I'd agree with the comments just made by Ajmal regards the resilience and the willingness of people to cooperate and collaborate and try and get over the huge hurdles we've seen in the last 6 months. What do I see the picture now? I think the picture from the OEMs anyway, from the OEMs I've been talking to, their view is that they're having to deal with and adjusting to a level of uncertainty, the likes of which they've never really experienced before. So stock levels are generally coming down to reasonable levels, but most OEMs have a problem with mix. A lot of them are prioritizing low emission vehicles and new EV launches where they can. But the key problems they've got is they've got products in short supply and other products which there's very little demand for. And trying to allocate that across markets with uncertainty across markets, potential new lockdowns, the economic picture going forward for the next 12 months means that a lot of OEMs I'm speaking to are looking to allocate supply as late as possible. So whether it's deep sea arriving into Europe at ports or ex-factory, or where there's unsold stock or i.e. lack of, where there's no customer sold orders or clear fixed dealer stock orders, there's been a lot more late allocation and reprioritization of supply to different markets. So making decisions on margin, on the economic recovery in different markets, and being quite dynamic about that. So I think that's kind of the watchword. I mean, I agree with the comments made that there's been a big focus on the sector, on new vehicle supply and logistics in a way that I haven't seen for a long time, partly because the problems of supply chains become apparent when they're under stress. But I think that the role of finished vehicle logistics in responding as dynamically as possible to reallocation of demand and uncertainty will be the continuing story for next year, at least.
Thank you. You've both all really touched on the collaboration aspect, but how do you do that? Are you looking at potentially sharing loads with carriers at different ports or two ports and having a mixed batch of vehicles on it, given the volumes and sort of ability of people?
I think we're certainly from a Kia perspective, we've been, sharing loads, certainly for as long as I've been looking after supply chain. It's only because it just makes commercial sense. We can, by sharing loads, we get the ability to move urgent vehicles out quicker. We get the ability to actually get to the more hard to reach destinations quicker as well. So yeah, I think that has paid dividends rather than just having a soulless contract. Not only the past 6 months, but certainly in the previous period as well.
Dan?
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think that's been the biggest challenge. As Owa says, we've been in a position where it's a shared network from a shipping perspective. What you've seen though is those shipping line schedules disappear up in smoke, and it's sort of like we've had to almost reconstruct those with them, yeah, to get an understanding around when we're going to get vehicles to market. Now, naturally, there's an element of collaboration as well there, but we do a lot of that through the service providers and through the carriers. So it's, I think there's almost, coming back to it, there is a can-do attitude within the industry. That's what we do in logistics. We get stuff from A to B, yeah, and that's always been the challenge is how we do that efficiently. We've just got a lot of headwinds now. In terms of doing that, but I think we're getting there, and it is that collaborative approach which is working.
And I think just echoing what Andy's just said, I think this is, the past 6 months is pretty much a game changer for certainly, and a wake up call for OEMs. I think this whole protectionism. You may not agree with that term, but the protectionism about supply chains, I've always maintained is a right way and a wrong way of moving a car from A to B or moving any product from A to B, and it doesn't serve anyone to actually protect what essentially is, just a product, be it in baked beans or a car, move in the most efficient manner. And if that means collaborating and sitting down with competitors to actually get it done more cheaper, faster, efficiently, so be it. And certainly that's been our attitude, certainly for a long time.
Going on to Ed for a second here, given obviously the damage and the quality of the vehicle getting to the place sort of undamaged, with the collaboration happening more, how does that impact your product, Ed? Does it mean that, if we're talking of loading a ship and it's a mixed element, can they all go through the booth, or how can that work?
Yeah, I'll bring a sense of optimism to it, because I guess with things like this, there's there's two sides, and some things, I guess, like online deliveries at the minute, which will be booming, and various PPE suppliers, etc. We sort of, in a strange way, whilst it definitely hasn't been straightforward, I guess you could say that we're in the right technology right now. And whilst there was a shift towards kind of using imaging and AI for vehicle inspections, I think that's been accelerated. So it's meant that a lot of projects that were sort of due earlier in the year have been put on pause, and they're starting to come back round, but we kind of expect them to come round twice as quick almost. And we've certainly been very interesting conversations, sort of globally and with different OEMs and suppliers. You mentioned ports as a good example. I remember this is probably going back to March, I guess before we were on full lockdown, but people started to take their own kind of course of actions, and naturally, and it's not to kind of it's not to criticize at all, but it's natural where you're looking at a manual process that started to be heavily affected and actually became unavailable as a manual inspection. If you take the Port of Southampton, for instance, we've got 5 of our auto-scan systems there for kind of looking at imports and exports for various manufacturers. And absolutely, they're mixed loads. So the systems we have in with Valenius export most of the UK vehicles that go through there, so the likes of JLR, but also people like McLarens, Bentleys, Rolls Royces, etc., in smaller numbers, but they absolutely use the same system, because whilst there needs to be a bit of alignment perhaps on that kind of a general understanding on what quality standards we're looking for, and naturally everybody works at different ones. I think that's perhaps a separate conversation about the need for a kind of universally accepted standard as we sort of move more digital with vehicle quality, etc. But there's definitely an application for that, but also kind of we're being led more into the used sector as well, which I know is not one for right now, but it's another example where we have very, very mixed loads, and kind of at the auction end, where suddenly physical auctions have gone and everything has to move online and digital. Firstly, they need better imaging, which we provide, but also that kind of requirement for less people being around each other and the vehicles and the product, the same as new vehicles, that actually the ability to do an inspection and review that inspection and appraise and imaging and so on remotely while everyone's working from home is obviously a real advantage. So for whilst there was some dark months, we use that time to innovate and focus on the R&D, and we're lucky to be able to do that in that respect. But also I think we've got real optimism coming out the other side, which we're starting to see kind of from now. Volumes which were kind of non-existent for a couple of months have picked back up, and also those people who previously kind of looking at projects and digital transformation and things within their own businesses have come back around kind of twice as hard. So yeah, I'll remain optimistic. You might come back to me in a few months. I might be on the floor again, but there's a sense of optimism for sure.
I think, Ed, in a COVID environment, the product and the sort of that move to technology has been really beneficial, because you're reducing touch points.
Exactly.
And what we're reducing is that element of cross contamination. So that's really positive. But again, we're now our supply chains are probably shorter because stock is reducing. So actually, the key is getting the vehicles to customer quickly. The winners will be the OEMs who are able to support the customer at speed, and by doing that through technology, we reduce time. But also, if there's any issues, and I think where we're going with the technology is we get real-time exception reporting. So whereas historically, from a quality perspective, I would probably only know I've got an issue when the vehicle arrives in market. Now, I know I may have a systemic issue actually, during that distribution process. I get that early warning, giving us the ability to fix. So it's data's always been available, but it's the timeliness of data, and it's what we can then do with it. So I think that's key.
Any take on that, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I think that links through to something we've been looking at ISTP certainly for the last 3 or 4 years, which has obviously accelerated dramatically. Everyone's been talking about distance selling and digital sales platforms, and the automotive sector has notoriously been slow to embrace online selling as part of choices for customers, whether they want to buy from a dealership or whether they want to buy online, or a mixture of the two. And the last 6 months has demonstrated a lot of certainly flexibility on the customer's side to do things differently. And a lot of dealers and some of the OEMs have also been either accelerating existing digital plans for their platforms, or starting new projects, trying to think quite radically how they can do online selling, or a mixture of online and in-person selling remote handover, contactless handover, and so on. Certainly, things like transaction handling in terms of digital signature, that's been overcome. There were a lot of concerns in the past about the legal ramifications of distance selling in terms of people's ability to cancel a contract. That seems to have gone away because people are more worried about achieving sales than they are about that particular concern. So I think, as per everything else we've discussed, really, the level of innovation and willingness to embrace the necessity of change at the moment has been beneficial in getting the franchise sector in particular and the NSCs to think differently about new vehicle sales and leasing. And I think that will be a long-term shift. And I think you'll inevitably see a fallback to traditional practices over the next year. But I think some of the innovations we've seen will accelerate, and the need for it will become even more apparent. The challenges that raises are quite significant, of course, for finished vehicle supply and logistics. So most OEMs, their ordering systems and for dealers into the order pipeline and production planning and the sales order bank are not compatible with online retail platforms. Talking to a manufacturer just last week, and they said, yes, exactly that. Nothing about our systems are remotely compatible with selling online. So that's been a significant challenge, and I think will continue to be so. It's partly technical. A lot of the ordering systems are ancient, frankly, and don't easily plug in, even with API, into online platforms. But a lot of it's cultural and about how you take the functionality in those ordering systems, which were designed for and they're easy to use and flexible enough to be applied on a self-service basis for customers. And also on the finished vehicle flow side, there's been a lot of work on tracking, and clearly we have a lot more visibility now in real time, as Dan said. But some manufacturers like Volkswagen have piloted showing customers where their car is in the process and in the finished vehicle deliveries chain, but delivering that reliably to customers in a way that helps rather than hinders the whole interaction between customer, dealer, and manufacturer has proven a challenge as well. So I think, again, there are some cultural issues about how that information is handled, expectations are managed, and so on. But overall, it's positive. But I think what it's doing is uncovering the rocks beneath that people have ignored for a long time about digital integration, both on the sales side and also in the fulfillment side.
Spoke yesterday to a guy from the people who designed Lucid's sales showroom for the future. Mm-hmm. Surprisingly, they're based in Newcastle. Mm-hmm. Historically, which does make sense for me given the changes we've had to make internally, but have been more from a gaming side.
Yeah, I know those guys.
Because gamers understand, obviously, how to operate everything. Mm. I see online sales personally quite achievable without a dealer visit in the fleet and leasing sector, where if you're joining a company, you're given a choice of 3 cars, you can find exactly what you want online, and you don't need to actually, to be fair to the dealer, be hovering in and out when you know full well your car's going to be bought by somewhere else in the country. But yesterday with Rawdon from your side, Dan, he was saying that the Jaguar Land Rover dealership base does have to be more in line in the car showroom with obviously their online ability to search and build your own car to exactly the spec that you want. But also, you still want that as a personal customer, the interaction with the dealer to ensure that you've got that relationship moving. I see it being a split personally, but I don't know what you guys think. It's.
Well, I mean, I'll just comment first regarding customer behaviour. I mean, I've seen several surveys recently that suggest customers are even more open to the idea of doing more of the transaction online. there was always, from the ICTP customer research, a mix. There are some customers who would only ever buy through a dealership in a traditional way. There are some that would own it's actually a minority, but a sizable minority of those that would be prepared to buy everything, to go through the whole process online. But the great majority would like to mix the two. So I don't see the dealer role. The dealer will continue to play an important role in the transaction, both in terms of maintaining trust and the relationship, but also in terms of managing problems, managing the problems in the process, whether that be oversupply and mixed problems in stock, or problems with shortages or customer expectations on lead time. So I think there's a clear role for the dealer. The question to me is how much of that is about walk-ins and showroom visits. There's been a resurgence of showroom visits since the end of lockdowns in most markets in Europe, but there's also a clear body of customers who are quite willing and happy to conduct most of the interaction remotely, even if that is with the dealership, in my view.
I must say, you said yesterday that people walked into the showroom really knowing what they wanted.
Yeah, customers go in.
Reassurance. Sorry.
And certainly that's what we've seen. The customers now are far more. Sorry, I've just got a Zoom call coming in. The customers now are far more well educated in terms of the model range, what they can get for the dollar in their pocket. They know more about the specs and the actual OEM, or certainly myself. And you are dealing with a much more switched on customer. I think that there is an element of a generational shift as well, where the younger generation is more happy to do transactions pretty much fully online, whereas the older generation do like to actually speak to someone. But I agree with Ben. I think most individuals certainly through retail purchase will mix the two up. I think as an OEM, and certainly speaking for Kia, the dealer network or the franchise dealer network is at the heart of everything that we do. And whilst yes, we are aware that there is a shift towards online selling. Whilst we're paying close attention to that, it's not the be all and end all of all our focuses. We will give dealers or customers the ability to do that, and give them as much information to make an informed decision. And if they wish to go down that path, they will in the future have that ability. But certainly for us, the showrooms are a fundamental part of the whole sales process. And again, as an OEM, I think there is that commitment to our franchise partners, because they have invested, huge sums of money, as they have with JLR and every other franchise dealer network.
Yeah, agreed.
If I could come on now to moving the finished product of electric vehicles, what additional steps do you have to do? And what are some of the challenges that you're facing with it?
Okay, if I can go first on that one. I think key we found with iPace, which is our first BEV vehicle, is it behaves completely differently to an internal combustion engine vehicle. So if we look at it from a movement within the distribution chain, the issue is on loading transporters, you've got 100% of the torque available and it's silent. So whereas historically you would feather the throttle to load, now if you get it wrong, you can go over the front. Suddenly that becomes very expensive. Luckily we've had no injuries there, but that's absolutely key. So the key that we've sort of communicated to our supply base is training and familiarization. You don't want people just getting in and moving a vehicle for the first time without having that knowledge. So that's one element. The second is we're seeing vehicle weight increase with BEV. So what you're then seeing is potential capacity reductions around movements for transporters. So that can be anything by up to 30%. Now, at the moment, we've got the ability to actually mix the BEV product with traditional. In 5 years' time, or 10 years' time, we don't know. What would it be like if BEV is 80% of the volume? Yeah. If you look in the UK government, they're talking of 2030, 2035, where ICE is no longer an option. So that's going to be key. I think it'll be interesting from a battery design and manufacturing perspective whether what we see is further lightweight batteries in the future, because I think we will go in that direction. And I think Tesla were on the news today introducing a new battery style, a cylindrical battery that they're talking about, which can actually be integrated into the vehicle architecture. So weight's a challenge. Movement itself. So if you run out in the distribution chain at the moment, you just go and get a jerry can and put some petrol in. That isn't an option. So what we'll do is we give a level of charge, but to optimize the battery, that is not 100%. We generally accept the vehicle with a charge of around 20%, and that's designed to actually maintain a level of charge or power all the way through to dealer. But we're talking with our partners is we need charging stations in each of the locations, and actually you need time to charge as well, so that's key. And then from a damage perspective, one of the key things which we've had to look at is where there is more major damage, you've got to quarantine the vehicle for up to 5 days and take its temperature. Yeah, because you've got to make sure that that battery cell is not overheating. Like that fire risk potential. Now again, it's few and far between, but it's always newsworthy when you sort of like see that over. And then finally, cosmetic damage. Batteries generally is visible from the underbody, and what we've seen is buyers of BEV vehicles, generally they're sort of like early adopters. They like to get the vehicles up on a ramp and have a look at the battery. Strange as it seems, now that underbody, yeah, can have a cosmetic standard. So we've got the challenge there. So some of the stuff that Ed's been doing with us is actually development of underbody camera systems as part of the booths, which can actually pick up that damage. Because the key thing is we do not inspect underbody through the distribution chain at the moment. And actually, from a BEV perspective, that's where a lot of the cost is. We've got to become quite creative as an industry in terms of how we look at that. As the percentage of BEVs increase as part of our portfolio.
From a health and safety aspect, and I'll come on to you now, Ed, what happens if you see damage? Can you still take it out of the booth? Should you leave it in the booth? Where do you put it?
Yeah, good question. Well, so in essence, the cars are in our systems for. From this perspective, really, on new vehicle, we have two products. One was fairly new and kind of was accelerated during that COVID shutdown, where we were able to innovate and things. But that's a compact system, which is just a straight drive through anyway. So there's no stopping regardless. It's just a drive through, whether that sits over a conveyor in plant or whether that's in a process where the driver would just drive through. And over the top of the underbody scanner, if you like. In our booths, they're only really in there for about 5-6 seconds, and only stop for around a second. So I think either way, the vehicle from our side passes through. Now, we've always tried to sort of stay very impartial on this stuff. Our job is more, what can we identify and how can we perfect those images to make sure that they can act as an enabler for AI, for instance, and to automatically detect these defects, and then provide that information back to the customer. So I'd probably throw that more back to the customers themselves and what they would do. But from our point of view, it's like a different defect, whereas the vehicle's going to be treated differently. If it's at the end of the cow line, or it's in a process warranty logistics handover point, for instance, a buy-off, then realistically that vehicle is likely to be turned around anyway and reworked if it was a dent or a scratch or a chip or wheel damage or whatever the kind of normals are. In the EV world, then it tends to, I presume, exactly as Dan said, that vehicle will then sit in quarantine for a time. I think what's been quite interesting is it's still quite new to people, and particularly transporting things is still quite new. And there's a bit of a process there, getting them up on transporters and moving them around, because it's quite a different beast, as Dan's just described. Is that damage happening in that process, and is it to do with loading and unloading on the transporters, or perhaps as it moves, and different suspension issues as it goes up and down transit modes or whatever it may be through the supply chain? Or actually is it more about the fitment of the battery, and was it in plant? But because those inspections perhaps haven't been taking place, one of the first things to do in capturing the damage quite categorically, as opposed to kind of perhaps a bit of a grey area, is understanding what the source is. And if you can affect the source, ideally, you'll tackle it at source and just reduce the damage happening in the first place, rather than worry about A, is it slipping into the supply chain, therefore who's going to pay for it, and B, what do we do when we find something wrong? I think what's been equally interesting is perhaps where, and this is throughout all of what we do, not just EVs, until you can categorically say where that damage is happening, it's hard to actually pinpoint it and then act upon it and turn that into a positive and a correction, I guess.
I want to come back to you on this for a second, Dan. We talk about quarantining the vehicle. Does that mean then in compounds and whatever, there's going to be a designated area just in case?
Yes.
That there are batch? Because otherwise, if that car goes, it's going to take a lot with it, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's the challenge. Is what we're going to have to look at is how we design our compounds to support how we look at our logistics flows. The positive is there is a lot of ongoing collaboration between the OEMs at the moment, because there is no industry standard, and as Ed alluded to, it's still pretty new for everyone. Yeah, so we're working closely with the other OEMs around how we at least determine an industry approach. Like a lot of things, everyone's developed their own sort of standard to be applied, and we've got to work to some commonality there. But it's key. It is going to be a complete change, and I think the big issue will be looking at significantly more volume. That's the one certainty. Yeah, electric vehicle as a percentage of sales will do nothing but increase.
Which it is. It's even increased more in lockdown, but we are quite close, really, with about a minute or so to the end of the session, and because they go on going live. What would be a takeaway for anybody that you'd like to give or leave with on the topic of this? I'll start with you, Dan.
I think I think for me the takeaway is we've just got to challenge the norm. Yeah, so we look at the COVID environment. We live in very turbulent times now, and it's challenge and collaborate. Yeah, they all say look at every idea. Yeah, investigate everything. So that would be the key takeaway from me.
Okay, thank you, Ben.
Yeah, I'd build on Dan's comment. I agree. I think the biggest takeaway for me is the ability to innovate and to embrace that ability to innovate with partners. Take risks that you probably wouldn't have done 12 months ago, because often the alternative is to fall behind competition, or just simply be unable to be flexible in the ways you need to be. So yeah, embrace innovation and risk, I think.
Thank you.
Be my comment.
Awais?
I will echo Dan and Ben's comments totally there in terms of, well, collaboration, taking a risk, taking a punt, and work with people within the supply chain, because they are the function matter experts. I think it does, just very quickly, one of the elephants in the room, of course, which I think we haven't touched on, is the challenge on the horizon, which is around Brexit and how that will affect us as an industry moving forward. But that's probably for another time. But I think it does, that throws up a totally different set of challenges, which are all interrelated in some weird fashion. But certainly, it's going to be an interesting end to the year and a more interesting 2021.
Thank you, Ed.
Yeah, I think someone said early on to me, one of those things was doing the rounds, but I think the Chinese understanding of crisis, or if you break down the characters, it was kind of something along the lines of the danger and opportunity, or precaution and change point. And I think that's really interesting concept. And I think that's how we've tried to view it, is actually, okay, it's all unprecedented. No one can quite predict, trying to predict anything was difficult anyway, and now it's got nigh on impossible. But actually look at that as an opportunity. And I think, where I've seen people do quite well out of it is identifying those opportunities and embracing it. And it is risk taking. It's similar to what everybody's just said. From our point of view, we're hoping to play out a role in that. And certainly, I think technology, regardless of us or anything, plays its role in that. And things like AI can really move things forward as well. So yeah, whilst it's with 4 young kids, I'm already a 6. We can't socialize or see anyone, but at the same time, I think if you part of those sorts of things, actually business wise, I think there's as much opportunity as there is impossible situations. So interesting times for sure.
Perfect. Thanks for a great session, everybody. Really appreciate it. Sorry we've run out of time, because we could have spent another hour on Brexit, I think. But take care. Thank you very much, and hope to see you virtually soon, but in person a little bit longer. All right. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks for organising. Cheers.
Bye.